Good evening. I'm Jonathan Higgins.
And I'm Rich Carlson.
And we are the Scanner Guys. Good. I did it. Darn it. You said it's a Scanner Guys show, and I messed up and said it. This is Train Aficionado Live, not to confuse you. Darn it. Yeah, Rich was making jokes about, saying that the Scanner Guys, and I made a mistake and did it anyway. So good evening, everybody. We were off last Wednesday, so we're back for this month with a action-packed month of shows. So we're really excited about that. We got some big news coming up during the Scanner Guys show next week. Next week. So definitely tune in if you're a fan of both the Train Aficionado show and the Scanner Guys show. This is going to be some really cool news there. Let's take a look at a couple of slides, and then what we'll do is we'll dive right into this evening's program. So this is Train Aficionado Live. We're in Season 3, Episode 7. Make sure you stay connected with us. Follow, like, and subscribe, of course, to all of our social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Also, check out our website, trainaficionado.com. You can sign up for the Trackside Bulletin and check out our store. We have T-shirts and masks and coffee mugs and hoodies and all types of cool stuff there. So definitely check that out on our website, which is trainaficionado.com. We got some really great blog posts that are going up each and every Monday. So if you haven't checked out the website, definitely check out some of the blog posts. Tonight's presentation is actually a version of the blog post that I actually posted last week. So definitely check that out, and we're going to cover it show form tonight. So here's the rundown for tonight's broadcast. We're going to be talking about Intercity passenger rail service, listening to the scanner on board a train, and then we're also going to take a look at Rich's photo archive, where he's going to be looking at various photos of Amtrak. So a lot of you guys, sometimes it's a rare opportunity to be able to get photos of Amtrak unless you live along the Northeast Corridor. Or along one of the active routes like for instance, the Downeaster that runs from basically Boston to Maine. Those run fairly frequently, and then I believe there's a couple other lines that you can see Amtrak a little bit more often than other lines where it's only
Chicago area, places like that.
Yeah, one per day. If you're in the middle of a line, like the Empire Builder, for example, if you're in the middle of that line, you're seeing, depending on what time it rolls in, hopefully you're seeing it during the day, or it could be traveling through the middle of the night. So there's a big plan that Amtrak has, and we've showed this map before. A lot of these routes that are in blue are new service that they're hoping to present. A lot of it's connecting in some cities. Boston actually has a plan to basically connect the city of Boston all the way to Albany. So that's along the CSX Boston sub.
That would have helped us out, maybe.
What was that?
That could have helped us out.
Oh, yeah, considerably. The Downeaster, going up to Rockland, basically extending that line. Some new service going up into Vermont. There is certainly a lot of talk of some rail service going in and through Atlanta, Georgia, basically running from Nashville, Chattanooga, Atlanta, and all the way down to Savannah. And then, of course, running from Charlotte to Atlanta and then right into Alabama. So there's a lot of these short runs intercity. So since I'm living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, I want to take a little bit of a closer look at the plan here. They're looking to present the 3C and D route. So basically it's Cleveland, Ohio to Cincinnati, Ohio, and then running right through Dayton. Many of you know Dayton from Dayton Ham Fest, which is coming up in May. But yeah, that's the 3C and D route. Now, it's quite an interesting thing. What they're presenting is basically connecting the 3Cs, the three major cities in Ohio. It's about a 297-mile route. 9 stops are proposed, 5 hours, and 3 round trips daily. So this is not new to basically this route. Originally, there was a service called the Ohio State Limited, and this service started in 1924, and it actually connected from Grand Central Terminal in New York City to Union Terminal in Cincinnati. The full trip, when it did that whole entire route, was 16 hours and 15 minutes, and then, of course, connected the 3 large cities that began with a C: Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, which is basically what they want to do, is return service to this route. And the funny thing about it, when I was doing research on this route, when the Ohio State Limited ran in between Cleveland and Cincinnati, it was a 5 hour and 15-minute trip. So they were pretty much cranking along. Even at that time, they're estimating with the station stops they're going to have along this route, it's going to be about 5 hours and 30 minutes. And then you're looking at the targeted time that they're hoping is for a little bit shy of 4 hours and 55 minutes. So it's just shy of that 5 hour mark. So this should be interesting that, rail services, passenger rail service is not something new that this line has seen before. It's basically going to come back, and that'll be great.
Yeah, most of the Amtrak expansion from their map is restoration of services that was present before Amtrak was.
Yeah, and the funny thing about this service here, Rich, they discontinued the service. So what ended up happening was this route basically gets shrunk down to the point where it was just Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And then in 1971, they stopped service altogether.
Yeah.
So the funny thing, Amtrak came about that point. Service was, eliminated on certain routes and such, but a lot of this is returning back. There's a full blog entry about this. And what I basically did is I looked at this proposed route and compared it to other intercity service, which we're going to take a look at in the next upcoming slide. So let's dive into that.
Yeah.
The Downeaster. Now, this is probably outside of the Northeast Corridor. This is one of the most successful Amtrak intercity services. The great thing about it's connecting 3 states. It connects to multiple college towns as well. And it's along a line that's along the coast. So you've got the touristy people that are going to be using that. You're going to have people traveling to school, whether it be into Boston or any of the other cities along the route that do have colleges. There is some people actually use this to commute into work just because of the frequency of the service. The thing with this route here, it's a little bit shorter than what's proposed in Ohio. It's 145 miles, but it has 12 stops, 3 hours and 20 minutes. And the big bonus of this route, it has 5 round trips. Yeah. So it's able to accommodate you leaving Boston, heading up to Freeport, Maine, for example. You could spend the day, visit LL Bean, check out all the shops in Freeport, and then you can make a return trip within that same day.
It's kind of like an enhanced commuter service.
Exactly. The thing with which we're going to look at the next example is kind of how it may not work to a benefit for trips like that. I mean, the great thing about it, you're able to go up for the day, essentially.
Yeah.
Be able to go up for the day, spend some time, head back down. Same thing with the 5 round trips. With that schedule, they basically planned it out so you can technically commute in. Let's say you're coming from New Hampshire and making your way into Boston. You're going to have a long commute, but you're riding on the train, so you're not having to deal with traffic and such. You could technically use it for work that way. And a lot of people now, for the most part, haven't gone back to work. They've been doing a lot of remote, so you may have business meetings occasionally, and you use the train in that fashion.
Sure.
So this is one of the success stories, is basically Amtrak's Downeaster. And this is one of the lines they're actually thinking about going further north up to northern points. There's actually some talk about adding service eventually to go to Bangor, Maine, which is further north, deeper into Maine, and that's an inland route versus this coastal route. So let's take a look at another example of a short line. Now, the Piedmont is a service that the North Carolina DOT is basically operating, basically running from Raleigh, North Carolina, to Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, the route is a little bit longer than the Downeaster. You're looking at about 173 miles, 9 stops, 3 hours and 15 minutes, and 3 daily round trips. Now, the problem with this service that I kind of point out in the blog is the limited frequency of service. So for the most part, like if you were going to leave Charlotte and spend the day in Raleigh, you're basically going to get off the train, spend maybe a couple hours, and then you're dead heading back. So the thing that I found that this service lacks is the frequency. I think if they added 5 round trips, 2 more round trips, I think it would be more of definitely a day trip thing. And you may be able to use this as a commuter service as well. Take, for instance, closest to Charlotte is Salisbury, Kannapolis, and then, of course, Charlotte. So if they had a couple more trains, people could commute on that end and commute back at the end of the day. But unfortunately, looking at that schedule, it doesn't present itself as a reasonable transportation thing for someone commuting into the work daily.
Looks like it's geared toward the commuters.
Yeah, and the other thing I noticed on the other end of the route, you could do the same thing with Raleigh, Cary, and Durham, and Burlington, and even Greensboro. If they added a couple more trains of service, basically 5 round trips, they would be able to do that as well on that end of the line. And then, of course,
that there were a couple trips in the morning and a couple trips in the afternoon to facilitate the two-way travel.
Well, the thing is the way they have the schedule set up. I think they had well and good with it, but I think they needed to add a couple more trains because it just doesn't. It's not feasible. I was actually, when I was living down in North Carolina, I was actually going to write a whole blog entry, and then I ended up writing a little bit here, including it in the blog entry about the 3C and D. Of course, the Amtrak service does roll through North Carolina. There's actually a couple of trains that roll through North Carolina. Of course, there's the Silver Star, which rolls through there. That's basically along the coast, basically the 95 corridor. That's running basically from New York to Florida. There's also the trains 19 and 20, which run from New York to New Orleans. Those actually pretty much go through overnight through North Carolina.
Yeah, and but then really intended for local service, though.
Yeah, that wasn't intended for local service. I'm just giving a couple of the other trains that are traveling through there since on the map. Well, and then, of course,
to the situation in Milwaukee, between Milwaukee and Chicago, Joe, one of our viewers, mentioned the Hiawatha service. That's the I think they got like 8 round trips a day between Chicago and Milwaukee, which is only under 100 miles. But there's a lot of trains, so you can go almost anytime you want and come back almost anytime you want. But there's also some long distance service on that same route. The Empire Builder goes between Chicago and Milwaukee on its way out to Minneapolis and the West Coast. So, you've got the long distance service there and the almost effectively commuter service.
Yeah, it's crazy, that it's all based on frequency. That's the whole thing of the blog entry is, where you looked at, 3 round trips versus 5 round trips makes a huge difference. The thing of it is, with the right frequency of service and the right scheduling, you're going to fill those trains. If the train is running on schedules and frequencies of the number of trains, it's not going to bring revenue or the ridership because it's not going to be convenient for all users. Right. So a couple of different things, with this line, I would say adding a train in the morning and then adding another train in the the later evening would be perfect. Those round trips would actually make it so it's convenient for commuters coming in on the tail ends of each line, and also for somebody going the whole route, they get on the first AM train out of Charlotte or the first AM train out of Raleigh, and they can spend the day in Charlotte or Raleigh on either end, or somewhere in the middle as well. So that's the thing.
Demand for the service. They have to have track space available, and they have to have the equipment available in order to provide the service. And these days, what's even harder is getting the train staffed with personnel.
Yeah, that's another issue as well. But I feel, like if we're able to do it, the ridership will come. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Let me continue on with the slideshow presentation. We're going to take a look at listening to the scanner aboard a train. So this is where we're going to dive into kind of some tips here. Of course, you see there the 125 AT scanner, which you can listen to anything, railroad-wise on a 125 AT. Here's some of the tips I can suggest. Doing your research on radioreference.com. So you'll look under the state page for each state, and then under there you will see a section that has some statewide frequencies, and of course the railroad frequencies is where you want to take a look at. Now, some of them are going to be marked under, like for passenger service, like Amtrak, the MBTA, and such. Some of the services are actually running on as a guest on railroads such as CSX and Norfolk Southern. So you'll have to do your research on what lines those Amtrak trains are traveling on, whether it be, a foreign railroad or typically the Northeast Corridor, it's going to be listed under Amtrak. Other routes, it's going to be listed on whoever they're using the line for. So make sure
who actually owns the track.
Yes. So make sure you do your research on radioreference.com. Next step I would recommend is allocate a bank to the scanner for those frequencies that are known frequencies. Now, once you're listening to those known frequencies and you're on a long distance route, there's going to be some frequency changes. And a lot of times the Amtrak crew or the commuter rail crew or the passenger crew that you're on will usually indicate, the engineer or the conductor will say, all right, I'm switching over to 20. So, just so he knows or she knows that everybody needs to switch over to 20 so they can have communication with each other. And that's typically when they're switching to a different section of railroad or switching altogether to a different line that's ran by CSX, Norfolk Southern, BNSF, or any of those other ones. The other tip that I would recommend is probably taking banks, the first couple banks on the radio, and dedicating those to the complete spread of the AAR channels, so 1 through 97. So the great thing about that, if they switch to a channel that you're like, oh crap, I didn't program that as one of the known frequencies, let's say they do switch to channel 20 on the scanner is AAR channel 20.
Yeah, so make sure you program it that way.
Yeah, make sure you program it that way. All right, so we kind of got some programming tips there. Now, the next thing you want to do is make sure you bring some headphones so you're not disturbing the other users of the train. You don't want to disturb them. Maybe a little earbud. If you have a guest with you, you can put the earbud in one ear and then listen to have a conversation with whoever you're riding with. But definitely bring some headphones. There is a couple of ear things that you can put in your ear to be able to just put it in, or you can just put headphones on if you're riding alone.
Yeah, there are those white AirPods, not the AirPods, but the corded Apple iPhone earphones, the white ones.
Yeah.
They work great on these scanners, and you get the audio out of both pieces. So you can wear one, and your seatmate can wear the other.
Yeah, and that's another thing. If your seatmate wants to listen, that's a great way to be able to split that audio.
Yeah, and the people sitting around you.
The other thing that I mentioned already, which is bulleted pointed there, is listening for frequency changes. You're going to hear them refer to a channel number. Just make sure that you're ready for that. And then if you don't program the AAR channels into the radio, print off a little chart. There's tons of them online, and you can program your 125 AT on the fly relatively quickly.
Yeah.
And the last tip is carry a lot of batteries. If you're going to be on the train for several hours, carry batteries. The other thing that you can carry, of course, is your programming / charging cable.
Yep, the USB cable.
You can plug that right in if you bring the USB plug.
Yeah, power plug.
Power plug. You can bring that. You plug it right in at your seat, typically at the train, but don't depend on that in case for whatever reason that plug's not working. Bring plenty of batteries.
Yeah, and the other question we get quite often is it legal to listen to a scanner on board a train? Absolutely. There's no prohibition whatsoever about having a scanner on the train as long as you're wearing earphones. The only problem they would have is if you're blasting noise out and everybody else doesn't want to hear it. But unlike an airplane, it's perfectly legal to have a scanner on board and use it while you're on the train, as long as you're using earphones.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things when I brought a scanner with me on a train, so there was one of these scenic railways that my dad and I was on, and we were riding on there, and then all of a sudden the train stopped, and then we were going extremely slow. So people were wondering what's going on, and of course the conductor wasn't walking through that car at all. So I was sitting there listening, and they had the brakes locked up, and they were trying to run with the brakes locked up on one of the cars. So I mentioned it. Oh, how do you know? I'm hearing it on the scanner. So I ended up taking the earpiece out, and then people could actually hear the communication, and they were kind of interested at that point because it was affecting everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the same thing happen to me on the Sunset Limited going through the middle of nowhere, Texas. And they hit a pedestrian out in the middle of out in the Texas desert, and the same thing. Nobody knew what was going on except for me, and and then the conductor of the train crew, as he was coming by, he saw me with the scanner, and I was using my earphones. He said, "I know you know, but don't tell anybody what's going on. We don't want to, So I just told people they were having, some issues.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into Rich's photo archive. So we will present that right now. So let's pop that up.
Highlight of the show.
All right. Here you go, Rich.
All right. So we're going to be looking at some pictures of Amtrak in the mid-late 80s. And I think we even got a picture in the 90s. Amtrak, everybody knows Amtrak started in the early 70s. When they were able to they took over the passenger service from most of the national railroads, the major railroads. A couple of them stayed out. The Rio Grande, the Rock Island, and the Southern Railway specifically stayed out of Amtrak for one reason or the other. Rock Island because they couldn't afford to join. The Rio Grande because they didn't want to have Amtrak having additional services on their track, and the Southern Railway because they thought that they could run the train better than Amtrak could. But in 1982 was just before the Rio Grande joined Amtrak the next year, and this is the train coming through Aurora, Illinois, which is 45, 50 miles west of Chicago. And at that time, this was still called the San Francisco Zephyr, which was the the Amtrak version of the Zephyr going between Chicago and the West Coast. And through Aurora, they pretty much grade separated all the track, and this was just outside downtown Aurora on their overpass there, just before the famous Aurora Roundhouse. If you ever get a chance to go to Aurora, the Roundhouse is still there, and the last time I was there, it was still a restaurant. Walter Payton used to own a restaurant there. I'm not sure what the restaurant is there now, but the last time I was there, you could still go there and eat dinner. But this is not far from there, and this train is on its way into Chicago. It also had a couple private cars at the end, but unfortunately, the pictures I had of it were not particularly good, so I didn't include them here. So this is the California Zephyr. About a year or so later, in LaGrange, Illinois, which is quite a bit closer to Chicago. This is probably about 20 miles west of downtown Chicago. And by now, this was now the California Zephyr. And it looks like these two locomotives just got out of the paint shop. They're very clean, these F40s. And they had a low-level baggage car, one of the original hand-me-down baggage cars. And this was at the LaGrange Road Station in downtown LaGrange, a great rail fanning spot. Before I moved out of the area, I used to go. I would sit there all day long on the benches, watching trains and taking pictures and having a great time. It was a great place to go rail fanning, and it's busy too. And now we got the Texas Eagle. This is in Fort Worth, Texas, and this is only about 2 years later. And look how ratty those F40s are. They are, the paint's peeling, they're filthy, they're kind of beat up, but they still run fine. And Amtrak got their money's worth out of the F40s. They came around in the late 70s, early 80s for the most part, and they ran almost all the Amtrak traffic up until about 10 or 15 years ago. And Amtrak really got their money's worth out of these things. I was taking this picture. That's Tower 55 in the background, which is a very famous rail fan spot in Fort Worth, Texas. Right behind me is a huge conglomeration of expressway, or in Texas they call them freeway interchanges. It's the big, where all the freeways all come together in Fort Worth, and there's just bridges and underpasses and stuff all over the place. It's a huge conglomeration of bridges and such. And then Tower 55 is kind of the same thing, a big intersection in Fort Worth. And about half an hour or so after this train came through, a bunch of auto racks, they were switching back and forth out of the yard, derailed on that very spot, and pretty much shut down the railroad for the in that area for the rest of the day until they got that cleared out the next day. Yeah, they do have a camera there at Fort Worth now. So this is the Sunset Limited. This is Picacho, Arizona. This is about halfway between Phoenix and Tucson. I took this picture in 1988, and at that time, Amtrak still served downtown Phoenix. They had the main line, the old Southern Pacific main line, runs south of Phoenix about 50 miles, and kind of bypasses Phoenix because of for whatever reason. And they had a branch line that came up to Phoenix and then came back down, and that branch line was kind of degrading. And the Union Pacific, when they took over the Southern Pacific, decided they didn't want to keep maintaining that line. Amtrak didn't want to pay for its maintenance. So they rerouted the Amtrak trains out of Phoenix and down through Gila Bend and Maricopa, and then continued on. So the trains no longer went to Phoenix. So you had to drive down to Maricopa, which is 40 miles south of Phoenix, in order to take the Amtrak train. But this was before they did that reroute. And this is one of their old General Electric P30CHs, or they call them the Pooches. And basically what it was a U30C that had a full width cowl on it and steam generator or HEP generator, depending on the generation of the unit. And typically for GE, they tend to smoke up a lot, especially when they start up after being stopped for a while. The carbon builds up and they spit out a lot of smoke. If you take a look real careful at the first car behind the baggage car, that is a former Santa Fe Super Chief bi-level car. And when the Santa Fe re-equipped their Super Chief train, which went from Chicago to Los Angeles through Flagstaff, they re-equipped it with these bi-level cars. And that was the design cue for the Superliner cars, which we all know and love from Amtrak now. Superliner cars were about a foot or so higher, and you can see the height difference between the Superliner cars behind and the Super Chief car just behind the baggage car. And some of the Super Chief cars were rebuilt as transition cars, so they could they had one lower level door at the end of the train, so that if you're in a single level car, you could go in to the lower level of the Super Chief car, and then they had an upper level door to allow you to exit out to a high level car. And so they called those a transition car. So they had a door, low, and then a door high, so that you go up the stairs, and then go out the upper. So that way you could transition between the low level cars and the high level cars. All those cars are gone by sometime in the early 90s, and it's all just super fleet out west and the newer stuff out east. Picacho is a really neat place. That's where the Sunset Line meets the Phoenix Line, and it's great because it's pretty busy, and you get trains coming from two different directions. And if you go walking in the desert along the tracks, there's a couple old freight cars buried in the desert along the tracks from derailments over the years, and they just decided to bury the cars and leave them there. So you can see pieces of metal that sticking out in the desert. This is the Amtrak's International train. This picture was taken in Bayview, Ontario, which hopefully you all know is in Canada. And Amtrak and Via both ran trains back and forth between the Chicago area and Toronto, and from Toronto into New York, and a couple other trains. So Amtrak would go directly to Toronto Union Station with their own train, and they would transition at Bayview. And back in the early 1980s or late 70s, Trains Magazine had an article called "The Best Train Watching Spot in Canada," and that was Bayview. So after that article came out, I was looking for a place to go, and that's where I went. And I've been out to Bayview dozens of times since then, and it's a great place to go rail fanning. Back then, you could go right into this gravel lot and stay there all day, and as long as you mind your own business and didn't make a mess out of things, they didn't have any problem with your rail fanning. Now it's all fenced off, of course, but there are still places around there where you can go rail fanning. That train is coming out of Toronto, and then it's heading down the Sarnia line. If it continued along that other track, it would go down to Hamilton. And then just to the south, there's another Y where if you continue going around, it'll go around that to Hamilton, and then another track that goes west out towards other parts of southern Ontario. And like I say, I love train watching out there. It is a lot of fun. This is the RTL Turboliner. In 1988, and during the 1980s, they ran these. Originally, they ran them in the Chicago to Milwaukee in the Hiawatha service, and then they moved them over to the Empire service in New York. I took this picture on the balcony or on the platform at Buffalo, and my buddy Jim and I were rail fanning out there, and I had been on a couple Turboliner trains a couple times going to Milwaukee, but one of the few times where I actually caught one on film. But the Turboliners are great because they use the turbine engine and the power car. The problem they had with them, other than maintenance costs being really high, is that you were stuck with a certain amount of space on the train. You couldn't just add a couple cars if it was busy that day. So, and finally, we are in Helper, Utah, which is in the mountains south of Salt Lake City, south and east of Salt Lake City, and in the foreground, you'll see some Utah Railway SD45 locomotives, former Southern Pacific units, and their big thing is bringing coal back and forth up to the Rio Grande main line, which is the Amtrak train is on. By this time, the Rio Grande had joined Amtrak, and they moved the California Zephyr to it. And Helper, Utah was named because they had helpers there. A lot of trains would have additional engines, and it would help push them up the mountains. And so that's where they named Helper. Not too far from here, there was a huge landslide that delayed the moving of the California Zephyr onto the Rio Grande tracks. Rio Grande decided to join Amtrak. They paid their fees and made the arrangements, and everything was all set to go. And then they had this big landslide, which caused them to have to delay the moving of the California Zephyr from Wyoming into the Colorado and Utah lines by a couple, 3 months before they finally were able to get it going. And this train had 3 locomotives, which was relatively unusual. Most Amtrak trains at the time had 2, but this one had 3. But those F40PHs were everywhere on Amtrak at the time. And that's the train show.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. That was really cool to be able to look at some photos of Amtrak. I just want to just let you guys know that some really cool stuff on the Train Aficionado website. So let's take a quick peek there. So this is trainaficionado.com, so definitely pay a visit to our website. We certainly have the latest blog entry, climbing America's steepest standard gauge mainline grade. We also have a blog entry about taking the Amtrak's take on Ohio's 3 Cs, the Yellow Springs, Ohio mini, not mini, but Little Miami Railroad, the Ludlow Rail Fanning Tower, which was really cool, and I didn't realize how close it was to me. And then, of course, we covered this in a Train Aficionado show last month.
Yeah.
The fire that destroyed the historical, forgotten Ringling Brothers circus train cars. And
I got to read that Saluda article. I've been there, and if you're standing there in downtown Saluda looking down the track, you can see that track like this. And it's like, I mean, that's hard to walk, much less get a train going out.
Yeah, I mean, from the research I've done, 611, the famous 611 steam locomotive, made that trip a couple of times in the early 90s. And some rail fanning spots, at Glendale, Ohio, which is a super cool little town. And it's got a great story about how the railroad rolled through there, covering the Smiley antenna and the Hamilton Railroad lines. And it's 6 railroad lines. And there's a short little line that's got a really cool story there, so definitely check it out. And then the beautiful Cincinnati Union Terminal. So there's some photos there and some history of that terminal. So certainly check out a lot of these blog posts that we've posted. If you like to support the blog and the Train Aficionado shows, we can't stress enough, visit our store. You'll be able to see some of our featured products here. We have t-shirts, coffee mugs, we have a tumbler, we even have a sticker. So if you've got one of those tumblers that you want us to put on your stickers on there, we actually have a hoodie and a couple of tees. So definitely do that as well. Check out the website, trainaficionado.com. We're working on some trackside guides right here. I've got a trackside guide that's really awesome for Altoona. So if you're planning on making a trip out to Altoona this spring, summer, or fall, definitely check this out. Also, I've worked on a trackside guide for the Charlotte district as well. Probably one of my favorite trackside guides is this Altoona Rail Fanning Guide, basically where we go east to west, looking at the various rail fanning locations, including some information about the location, what it looks like from east, what it looks like from west, even including the street address. Some locations even include places to eat and some train shops that are near there as well. So definitely check out the website, which is trainaficionado.com. Got a lot of great stuff there. We've got some pretty sad news. One of the editors, the main editor of Trains magazine, passed away. From what I understand, any of the rail fans that met him said he was just as excited as everyone else, when that special heritage unit rolled through, or a steam engine or such. I'm so sorry to hear about Jim. He passed away.
Yeah, I never got a chance to meet him, but I heard some good things about him. So,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing I saw throughout the social media rail fan community. A lot of people paying tribute to him. There was several people that had the opportunity to meet him and was able to take a photo with him. We saw tons of photos as well. So it's so sad to see that that he passed away, and he was gone too soon. He was pretty young.
Yeah, he was a relatively young man. I think he was 60, 61, something like that. So,
what we can do is kind of look at. I don't see any questions out there, but if you want to, certainly ask some questions. I know Joe Curtis mentioned here about the Metra. Was in the Chicago area last Saturday. He rode it. I mean, that's really cool. To be able to ride some of these lines, you're able to see the history. And a lot of times you'll see some abandoned signal towers or switching towers along these routes. I mean, if you're able to sit by the window as a rail fan, you're able to see things that the everyday commuter is not going to pay attention to, like an abandoned siding or an abandoned branch off the line. I mean,
on Metro trains, if you're heading inbound on a Metro train, if you get into the front car, in the cab car, you can stand there and get basically an engineer's eye view looking out the porthole window of the door leading out, so you can see what's going on, just like you were an engineer. And that's always, whenever I ride Metro, I always ride in that front car.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Like I rode a lot of the MBTA lines, and just knowing the history of the line and then doing some research, I would try to find where there's an abandoned branch off the line. And, so I would sit on that side of the train where I knew it turned off and trying to find those things. I mean, a lot of times it's easy to find, and sometimes it's extreme. You got to really look for it depending on when that portion of the line was abandoned.
Well, Fox Lake is kind of a neat place to go to. It's the end of the Metro service, and just to the south of the train station, a couple blocks, is a storage yard. And they, park a lot of the Metro trains there when they're, over the weekend and, during the evening when they're not being used. And you can get some pretty decent roster shots from there. And then in the morning when they are going to take that train set out, they hop on the train set there and they start it up and they run up to the station, which again is a block or two to the north. And then the engineer actually gets out of the locomotive, walks over to the control cab on the other end to run the train south. And then there's some freight operations on that line. The Wisconsin Southern comes in out of Janesville on that line. So most of the time that's at night, but sometimes during the week, they'll get there before it gets dark during the summertime because it's light out later. Or on the weekends, they will actually go there during daylight hours on the weekends. So you can catch the Wisconsin Southern coming through there as well.
Yeah, and this is the perfect opportunity here for Metro weekend service is $10. So you can ride any Metro train for the whole entire weekend. The MBTA, I'm not too sure if they are going to do that this year, but they've done it in the past where you can get a weekend pass. And if you're a rail fan, you can take a couple of the routes and just deadhead back into Boston and take a couple of different routes. I mean, that's the great thing about when they run this service. It's awesome to be able to see some of these lines that you don't normally travel on, and it's at $10. You can do a couple of lines during a weekend.
I've done just that where we just ride trains all day long, and we did it during the week because the problem I had during the weekend is because they have reduced service on weekends. There's a Saturday schedule and then a Sunday schedule, which is like a couple trains a day in each line. But we did it during the week, so we weren't able to save the money, so it cost more money. But we took a lot of trains. I mean, I lived in Vernon Hills, so we went out to Fox Lake, rode the Metro Milwaukee District North line down to Chicago. We rode the Milwaukee District out to Elgin and back, and then we went to Joliet and back, and then we went to Crystal Lake and back. And then the next day we did the Kenosha and Geneva lines, and then we rode the South Shore all the way out to South Bend and back. And man, we had a great time.
Yeah, and Brian mentions, since we talked about the MBTA, I mean, there's a lot of great rail fanning in and around Boston, that's for sure. I mean, if you go out anywhere along the Northeast Corridor, one of the most popular places in Massachusetts to rail fan is Mansfield, Massachusetts, especially during the week when the CSX local comes onto the main line from the Framingham Secondary, services a couple of the industrial parks in Mansfield, and occasionally it'll run down to Attleboro, Massachusetts, and then go on the Middleborough Secondary. So there's a lot of great activity during the week if you have a day off during the week to be able to go down to Mansfield, see the CSX run on the main line, and also be able to see the Acela, the regional, and of course the MBTA trains there. One of the locations in Massachusetts is outside of North Station. There's a pedestrian walkway that's just outside of North Station that you can walk on that pedestrian bridge, and you're able to take photos, and you're able to see the bridges there that go up and down just outside of North Station. I'm just trying to think of Air, Massachusetts as another location where you can see a mix of freight and, of course, what's running through there, Pan Am, and then I believe running through there as well is one of the Norfolk Southern trains that operates on that line as well. And then the last place that's a big highlight, a lot of you people know about it, is in Palmer, Massachusetts at the Steaming Tender Restaurant, where you can get definitely a great meal and then watch 3 railroads, basically CSX, the Mass Central, and the New England Central Railroad. So you're able to see those, and occasionally the Amtrak that runs through there, which is the I can't remember what it is, the Lake something. I know some of you guys may know it off the top of your head. I can't remember because I haven't been up in Massachusetts in quite a while. Looks like we got Justin has a comment here.
So Amtrak and a couple of the trains operate over bridges, and they have licenses for marine channels. And he's asking if we've ever heard the trains themselves on the marine channels. Actually, you wouldn't hear the train itself operating on marine channel, but what you would hear would be the operator, either the dispatcher, or if there's a local operator for the bridge, a tender or a local operator for the bridge, they would operate on the marine channels to coordinate closing and opening of bridges with marine traffic. And by federal law, marine traffic has the right of way when it comes to movable bridges over waterways. So if the bridge is normally open, then they would close it for a train. But if the bridge is normally down, they would open it for marine traffic. So like I say, the marine traffic normally has the right of way. So they would have to accommodate the marine traffic, even if that means delaying a train. So
Lakeshore Limited. was the name that escaped me. I couldn't remember it for the life of me. I knew it was Lake something.
Lake something.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about this the other day when I was working on these pictures for the F40 PHs. Chicago's Metra has a large fleet of over 100 F40 PHs that they are still running every day. And some of their units are, over 40 years old, about 45 years old. Okay. And they're still running.
The MBTA is still running those, and they're running those back to be remanufactured or reconditioned.
Same thing with Metra, and they're getting them rebuilt and such. And I remember years ago when the E units were still running on the Metra tracks, and rail fans came from all over the country to see the E units on the Burlington and on the Northwestern, because they were the last places to catch E units. Those E units were 34 years old when Metra finally took them out of service on the BNSF, and about the same age when they took them off the Northwestern ones off on the Northwestern lines. These Amtrak F40s are over 10 years older than those E units were. Why aren't the rail fans flocking to Chicago and Boston to get pictures of these 45-year-old locomotives like they were with the E units? Yeah.
I really don't know. I mean, the crazy thing about it is the MBTA purchased, I can't remember the locomotive number, but they purchased 40 of these brand new locomotives. They came into Boston. They had a hard time with the New England winters.
Yeah.
They ran into all types of issues. So the MBTA decided, no, I wish they got the Chargers. They didn't. They got something that looks a wannabe type of Charger. I shouldn't say that, but
yeah.
But anyway, what ended up happening is they started sending out those 40 units to be, because they still worked.
Yeah.
So what they did is they sent them out, basically overhauled them, repainted them. Of course, knowing the MBTA, they don't keep their locomotives clean. So the only time that you see it spotless is when it comes back
from being rebuilt and painted.
Or unless it's running on the inaugural first Cape Flyer train heading down the Cape. They usually make sure that the two locomotives are on there and nice and clean, because it's the beginning of service for the summer. Other than that, for the most part, it's lucky if it get washed. But the thing is those locomotives certainly, they can stand the test of time. I mean, the thing is the MBTA's thought process, they were going to retire those out.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they're certainly still the workhorse.
I know Metra they're in the process of having some new rebuilt locomotives. The SD70 MACHs are being built, and I think they're buying like 45 of them to start replacing some of the more decrepit F40 PHs. But one thing that Metra has been doing recently, which I wish they were doing this when I still lived there, is repainting locomotives in heritage paint. You got the Norfolk Southern's got their 30 heritage locomotives. Well, Metra has got locomotives repainted in Northwestern and Milwaukee Road, Rock Island, and Burlington CB&Q paint. And they had another locomotive, the original, I think it was the 101, which was the first of the F40 PHs. They didn't repaint it, but they put it in a wrap that apparently a railfan club paid for this. And they made a wrap, those silicone wraps that you see on the cars these days, and they wrapped it with the old paint scheme, the original RTA paint scheme from when these units were first purchased. It's kind of like a baby blue, and that looked great. And they figured it would last for about a month or two, and sure enough, it did. And it's gone now. But then I wish they would have done that while I was still living in the area, because I would be grabbing them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing about it gives the rail fan something to chase, essentially.
Yeah.
There's a couple of locomotives that are in different paint schemes for the MBTA. There's one that they've one that they think they call fish scales. It basically says a mass dot on it. It's in blue, and it's got these little things that look like fish scales. I'm not too sure what the thought process was, but rail fans said, well, I see, they caught, fish scales on such and such line. So it gives, with these different paint schemes, and especially I love the heritage, to the original railroad lines.
Well, after the E units were gone, metric got to be very boring to watch because they pretty much had just F40 PHs. And then they started getting a couple others. They got these MP36s, which got kind of a rounded nose, but they're basically a fancy looking F40 PH. I mean, mechanically they're very similar. And they got a few rebuilt locomotives out of Toronto, out of Ontario, and a couple old Amtrak locomotives, and repainted them. But it was relatively boring for a long time. And now they've got all these different paint schemes and these heritage units, and now these new locomotives coming up, and it's a lot more interesting now that I'm gone. So we got a question from Joe.
Oops.
Oh, we both hit the button at the same time.
Okay, I'll get the next one.
Okay, long distance Amtrak trains. He sees the engineers swapping out at certain points like Fort Madison. And there's a camera at Fort Madison. I watch that one all the time as well. Do the conductors or other crew members swap out? Operating personnel on a train, railroad personnel, have very strict rules on how long they can work. And I think these days it's 12 hours, and then they have to have a rest period. As far as on-board personnel, I'm not positive what the rules are because those people normally stay with the train from start to finish, but they have crew quarters for the onboard service personnel to be able to sleep and rest, and they can get their prescribed rest on board the train. But the operating, the Amtrak operating people, the engineers, and I think the conductor have those 12 hours, and they would swap those crews out at certain locations. But the onboard crew would normally stay on the train the entire length.
So this is an interesting question from Jonathan. He says he has a weird problem with his 125. It's not really picking up anything. Used the USB cable, barely gets the weather. $70 service for a lot of relatively inexpensive radios. Any thought? So the thing with the 125 AT is there's a little soldering. I know we don't recommend you taking the radio apart, but there's a pin in there that's soldered that's connected to the board. That soldering joint could have came undone. I mean, that's all it would take to basically reduce down your reception. If you have another scanner, what we would recommend doing is running the weather channel on one radio. If you're getting booming reception on a weather station and you're not getting booming reception on your 125 AT, more than likely it's something with the antenna connection.
Try to swap the antenna between the two radios and see if the problem follows the antenna or the radio. And then that way you can help eliminate it. If you do decide to try to fix yourself and you've got a soldering iron, it's not that difficult since the radio is out of warranty anyway, and you can buy a new one for $130 and use one for less. You just take out, there's 6 screws. There's 4 on the back here, 2 underneath the battery. You take the case apart, and you can see that center pin that Jonathan talked about. We had pictures of that on one of the scanner guys' shows, and you can just resolder it. And I've done that before on a 325, which is basically the same as this. It's not that hard. I just, just heat up the joint. I didn't even have to add any new solder. Just heat up the joint, and what'll happen is if the connector gets stressed a little bit, you could have dropped it, could have banged it. If that solder joint breaks, you effectively have no antenna.
Yeah, it definitely needs that antenna for sure.
Yeah.
So there is, I received your email, and I'm looking forward to this. So he's going to start filming a YouTube series which is railroad hotspots and good eats, which is going to be great. Us rail fans, we love to be able to go out, watch trains, and of course get a great meal. So of course we'll announce those videos once they come online on the Train Aficionado show, so you guys can certainly check it out. So we're looking forward to that. Thank you so much, Robert, for contacting us. We are, of course, always looking for some great rail fanning locations. I've gotten a couple via email. Hope to get a couple more. We would love to make a show about your favorite rail fanning spot. Yeah. So email trainaficionado@gmail.com. The email address is right on the screen. Trainaficionado@gmail.com. Send us a brief description of your favorite rail fanning location and a couple of photos that you've taken at this location. Once we've got a couple more photos, we would love to include that into a show, an upcoming show, where we can give you your 15 seconds of fame right here on the show, and of course share that rail fanning spot with our audience as well.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of great rail fanning spots. You know, a lot of them in the Northeast, especially, and into the Cincinnati area. And I spent a lot of time in the Upper Midwest. Maybe I could start putting some of mine together, and maybe we should start looking at rail fan drives too.
Yeah, a day trip to be able to hit key points or key. Yeah. I mean, the other thing too that you can look at is if you're looking for a summertime road trip, hopefully gas prices will go down a little bit more, and then what you can do is you hit some really cool, beautiful train stations and depots. I mean, the Cincinnati Union Terminal is basically a museum in there, and then of course it's still a train station. But when you walk through the main doors, it's an elegant, beautiful station. The blog entry that I posted, let me see if I can pull that up, and I can show a couple of quick photos, and you can see it right here. So hold on one second. We'll share that screen so we can see it. So we can see here, it is a beautiful station. The mural here, there's a mural on this side of the station, and then of course another mural on the other side. And it's absolutely a beautiful station. I think, wait a minute, I've got the wrong blog entry up. Hold on one second. I'll do the one for the, but that's one of the photos of inside.
Yeah, there's that picture of the outside one there. It is. I've been there. It's been years since I've been there, but yeah, it is a gorgeous building.
Here you go, right here. Right here, you can see the mural on this side and then the mural on the other side, and it's certainly a beautiful station. Inside the museum there, they actually have a, I think this is an HO scale replica of the city of Cincinnati, which is beautiful. And they actually have a reproduction of what Union Terminal looked like back in the day. They used to have a taxi and busway that would go inside the building and then loop back out, which was really awesome. You can see that on the left and the right side of the building. The building looks like an old-fashioned radio.
Yeah, if you look type thing, yeah.
Yeah, if you look at it there, it's got the
tombstone radios they used to call them.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a really awesome place to visit, and this is definitely somewhere where you can visit and just walk in here and just be able to see the station.
So Les asked about good train watching spots in the Toronto area. I've spent quite a bit of time in the GTA, mostly in the Burlington, Mississauga, Hamilton type area. As far as downtown Toronto itself, I haven't spent a lot of time, in the city itself. But if you get down to, we talked earlier about Bayview Junction, there's the Botanical Gardens, and there's a couple spots in Botanical Gardens which have a great overlook of the tracks. Lakeshore Drive, where it bridges the tracks, you can park in a parking lot nearby and walk to that bridge and get great overhead views of it. And the Royal Botanical Gardens, there's a couple of places which you can look out over the bay and then see the tracks right below you. Hamilton, there's a couple bridges over the tracks on either side of the yard, which have great views. We used to spend time at the old Burlington Depot, which is where the Halton line split off. And used to be some great train watching there, but unfortunately you can't get back there anymore because they built a new train station. But if you can get on a passenger on the Go Transit um, platforms, you can do rail fanning from there.
Yeah, it's a great thing about some of these public spaces where you can actually rail fan safely.
Yeah.
Some of these platforms. I know there's I believe I saw during the summer months, some of the Instagram accounts I follow. There's a group of kids that actually set up for the day at one of these stations. They got the camp chairs out. They get the cameras up. They make the day of it. Some of them actually have a cooler, so they get their water or their soda there, or probably even food and snacks. As sitting trackside for the day, you do certainly get thirsty and hungry.
Oh yeah, yeah, and especially in the summer months, and depending on where you're at, stay hydrated, and that's it. It's hugely important out here in the desert. In the summertime, we don't go to the grocery store without a cooler and a couple bottles of water.
That's for sure.
And so if you're out rail fanning, make sure you've got something to eat and drink, even if you don't touch it during the day. But as long as you have it, you're there. And make sure you got a hat. In the summer, you need a hat in the summertime to block the sun. That's hugely important out here, especially if you don't have a lot of sun protection up here. That's important. And depending on where you go on train watching, if you're off the beaten path, here we got to worry about rattlesnakes.
I think you're going to say worry about rail fans.
Yeah, no. Well, rail fans are sometimes as dangerous as rattlesnakes too. But so snakes and scorpions and other sorted critters that you're going to have out in the desert around here. And up north, you're going to have skunks and porcupine and other those kind of critters. So you got to be aware of your environment.
Yeah, so it looks like Jonathan's reporting he's having a new rail fanning platform being built about 10 miles away from him. And that's a great place to be able to meet other rail fans. And plus, a lot of these pavilions have a covered space, so you're not out in the sun all day, and you can watch the trains certainly safe from there.
Well, I would go to Rochelle. In fact, I'm watching the camera at Rochelle right now. And I was going to Rochelle before they built the platform there. And if you take a look at the camera at Rochelle, you'll see where the tracks come together. And on the north side of the junction, on the north quadrant of that crossing, is gravel a lot. And that's where the rail fans used to hang out before they built the rail fan platform. And again, you behaved and nobody bothers you. We'd go out there, spend all day out there. And while we were there one day, the city manager came by, or the city planner, I forget what it was at the time, came by and said, "Hey, what are you guys doing out here?" So, "Oh, we're just watching trains." And he didn't understand why we would be there to watch trains, so we explained it to him. And that's where he got the idea to build the original rail fan platform. And that was the first one in the country. And that was a big deal. And about 2 years later, he got that. He was able to get that built. They bought a couple houses on the other quadrant, and they tore one down. They kept one as kind of like the gift shop and bathrooms and such. And they built the platform, and it was very successful. And people came from miles away, and they spend money in town. They go to the restaurants. They go to the hotels. They buy gas, and they spend money in town, and it's been worth it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing about some of these rail fanning pavilions coming in, which is awesome. Any other questions or comments before we wrap it up this evening?
Les has got a couple train watching locations in the Greater Toronto area, so check the comments for those. Jonathan asked what's the small section of track sitting there. I'm not sure if he's talking about in your view or my view or what. So not sure what he's talking about. So Jonathan, if you're still around, which section of track are you talking about?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but there's these train watching platforms. There's one in Homewood, Illinois, which is in the Chicago suburbs, Coeur d'Alene, Georgia. Where's the Folkestone funnel?
Folkestone Funnel, New Rochelle.
Yeah, there's a couple. There's one in Ohio.
He's asking about on the camera.
I know what he's talking about. Okay, so if you're watching the Rochelle camera, you see a little section of track in the view. In fact, if you look at it right now, the camera's pointing at it. What that is, it's a representation of the old strap rail. So they've got a couple wood rails, and then they put some metal strapping on it. And in the old days, all metal rail was very expensive. So they would use wooden timbers as the rail, and then they would use a thin strap of metal as the wearing surface on that would be screwed onto that wood. Because having rail brought in either from England at the time or being made here was extremely expensive. So it was a lot cheaper to do it this way. So that's a representation of what's the old strap rail. And if you're looking at that picture, you also see a fire pit in there, and occasionally people will come in. They'll put up put a campfire there.
I've been to that pavilion in Pennsylvania. It's a cool spot.
How do you pronounce that city?
I'm not sure. I'm not even going to try to butcher it.
Nkungi?
Yeah, I've been there. The really cool thing about it is my dad and I sat trackside there, and the signal that was there at that point would illuminate when there was a train close.
Yeah.
So it would stay dark, when there was nothing in the area, and then it would illuminate. So my dad and I sat there, and then we kept, every so often look at the signal and say, "Oh, something's going to be coming," because he saw, the signal is illuminated, and that was a Norfolk Southern line. I believe I did a blog entry on that pavilion.
Yeah, it's called approach lit signals. So Jim asks why I told him what I told him while we were watching, and we basically told him we like trains, and we'll just come out here. We take pictures of trains. We watch trains go by. It's our hobby. It's some people go out and do model planes or model trains or collect stamps. We watch trains.
Yeah, I mean, I've had when I was rail fanning in North Carolina, I had my dad and I were sitting trackside. We actually had our camp chairs set up, and we were sitting there, and then a police car came up to us, and it drove on the grass coming up to us, and he said, "Hey, you guys catch anything cool out today?" And he knew exactly what we were doing because it was one of those communities that he knew, that the rail fans would be out there. Yeah. He even asked, we had some suspicious subject, walking around doing some weird things. Did you see him? He gave us a description. We didn't end up seeing him. But, he just like, "Hey, have a good day," because, in some communities, it's the norm. People come, around the area, or some people actually drive out to these well-known locations, and the police know that, it's another set of eyes and ears essentially out there trackside.
Most of the time, as long as you're not trespassing or doing anything illegal, the cop sees you standing by the tracks, he might stop and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" "I'm watching trains. I like trains." And, show them, a copy of Trains magazine, show them some pictures that you've taken on your camera or something like that. And, almost every time they'll say, "Wow, that's kind of cool." He may not understand it, but it's like, okay, fine, whatever. As long as you're not trespassing and, causing other problems. But if you're on railroad property,
that's a different story.
Different story. Public park, public sidewalk, public street, public property, you're fine. But if you're on private property without the express permission of the property owner, that's going to cause problems. So, Featherfoot Road. Did we see the tornado at the Coeur d'Alene camera? I heard about it and I saw some pictures on it in Facebook, but I didn't see it live. But yeah.
It's crazy stuff that's going on.
Oh yeah. So I mean, I'm sure they'll be on the replay later on tonight. But there were some pictures on a couple of the Facebook groups, so you can catch them there.
All right. So it looks like we've caught up with all the comments and questions. So what I'm going to do is Just give you a quick reminder. So next show on Wednesday night will be these scanner guys. And we're going to be talking about the Uniden Siren app. So if you've got the 536 HP by Uniden, you want to tune into this. If you've never used the app, definitely check this out. It's going to be Wednesday, April the 13th, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. We're also going to have a major announcement of an event that's coming up in May. So pretty big deal. So definitely tune in for that. We're going to be making a major announcement on the Scanner Guys show. And if you're a fan of this show, and you may want to tune in for that as well, because that may be cool for you as well. So definitely tune in. Train Aficionado Live. We'll be back the following Wednesday, I should say, April the 20th. 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Do that right now before you forget. Subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, hopefully relatively soon. We're at 600 and some odd, so definitely hit that subscribe button. Next Wednesday, the following Wednesday after Train Aficionado Live, we'll be back with the Scanner Guys as well to wrap up the month, put a bow on it, so definitely check that out as well. Make sure you follow, like, and subscribe to our social media on Train Aficionado, and of course, the Scanner Guys as well. And stay tuned. We always will have more information with our Trackside Bulletin, which you can sign up on our website, and then help support the show and the blog. Get yourself some Train Aficionado swag. We have T-shirts, coffee mugs, hoodies, a tumbler, some cool stickers as well. Definitely do that at the website. So we definitely appreciate that as well. The website is trainaficionado.com.
I want to address a couple of questions from our friend Chris about Amtrak service into some of the other cities in Michigan. He's asking why there wasn't service to Petoskey and from East Lansing and such. Most of these small, short services within a state, like within Michigan or within Illinois or within other states, most of those are funded by the states themselves, and Amtrak basically just operates the train for the state. And Amtrak is usually not going to be interested in running a train from a relatively small city like Lansing up to a much smaller city like Petoskey, unless somebody is going to foot the expenses and they have the personnel and equipment in order to run that train. And there probably just is not enough sustained traffic to justify a train between Lansing and Petoskey, or Lansing and wherever it is, to justify the expense of rehabbing the track, acquiring the equipment, and hiring the personnel in order to operate and run it. It would just be too expensive and probably just isn't worth the money.
Yeah, I mean, basically what ends up happening, I've attended a ton of these meetings in Massachusetts when proposed rail service for a certain area, such as a commuter rail or even a event train, it goes through a case study. And what they do is they look at, what the potential customer base is going to be for the train. I mean, basically, they're not going to run a train just for the sake of running it. If it's not going to be profitable, it's not worth running it. So that's the other thing. They need to, when they do these studies, they're basically looking at the cities and towns along the route, how many potential customers they're going to have, and how often they're going to use the train.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're going to use it once in a blue moon, it's not enough.
Yeah, they tried that. Amtrak tried that with a train between Chicago and Janesville, Wisconsin, years back. And part of the deal was that they were going to use it for LCL, less than carload, freight traffic. And that didn't take off, and they were hoping they would have enough passenger base. But I rode a couple of those trains, and there were times when I was the only passenger on the train. They'd have two locomotives and a single passenger car. So they had one on either end. So they would, because they didn't have turning facilities at Janesville. And, so now you've got, 4 or 5 personnel to operate the train, 2 locomotives, and at least 1 passenger car, maybe a baggage car or 2, and you're hauling half a dozen customers at most. There has to be a need for the service in order to justify the expense, and those little towns just aren't going to present that type of customer base.
That's for sure. Well, I guess on that note, we'll wrap up this edition of the Train Aficionado live show. Just want to remind you one more time, we are looking for your favorite rail fanning spots. So definitely email it to trainaficionado@gmail.com. Include a brief description. Include some photos from that location. Even recommend some restaurants around the area that you think would be great for a rail fan to stop and grab a bite to eat. So definitely do that. We'll be featuring those photos and locations in an upcoming Train Aficionado show. So certainly keep those coming to us. We would love to show off your favorite rail fanning spot. So for this edition, I'm Jonathan Higgins.
I'm Rich Carlson.
We hope that you have a great evening, happy and safe rail fanning. We'll catch you again in a couple of weeks. Next week, make sure you tune in to the Scanner Guys. We do have a really cool announcement, and you're not going to want to miss that. So we'll catch you again next week for Scanner Guys and the following week for Train Aficionado. Have a good night.
Bye, guys.